Tire companies make radials, and by now you've seen how VOR stations make radials too, and how the radios in your Skyhawk receive the signals they make. That's all well and good, but you're wondering if that gadget will really be useful in your flying. So what do you get with VOR? Well, VOR gives you a means to positively get on and stay on a selected course. You know instantly if the wind is blowing you off course, and you can correct for it, which leaves you more time to keep track of your progress along your intended course. Now, planning a route with VORs is easy. You can create your own course between two VORs or between a VOR and an airport. Just draw the course line and read the radial on the compass rose. Or you can use what are called Victor Airways, V for VOR, which are already drawn on the charts. And you can think of them as maybe electronic highways in the sky. Here, for example, is V230, or more properly, Victor 230, between Salinas and Pinoche VORs. And I'll tell you, that Pinoche VOR really has some panache. Because VORs and the airway system are so extensive, you can usually plan your entire route using airways and radials all the way along to your destination. And it takes fewer steps, since VOR radials and airways are already aligned with magnetic north. You don't need to correct for magnetic variation. To make it even easier, the exact radials for airways are printed on the charts, 061 degree radial. In fact, it's so easy that even I was able to pick it up on my first attempt. Okay, I really don't have it down yet, but I'm getting it. Notice that an airway is defined by a radial from the VOR. The word radial always refers to the course from. This can be confusing because you don't always fly from a VOR. Often you want to fly to a VOR. So let's see how that works. When you are using the VOR for navigation, for example to track an airway, always set the OBS so it agrees with the direction you're going. And by that I mean toward or away from the VOR. Otherwise, the VOR indications, the left-right needle and the to from flag, won't make any sense. They'll be the opposite of what you expect. What you'll get is called reverse sensing, because when you fly toward the needle, you'll actually get further away from your intended course. Not a good thing if you're trying to stay on course. In order for these indications to make sense, the OBS setting has to agree with the direction you're flying, not with the radial you're using. Example, let's assume you're flying from the Burley VOR, and they call it the Burley VOR because it's big, strong, and hairy, Burley, to the Pocatello VOR in basically a northeasterly course. And since Victor 269er is a direct route between them, here it is right here, Victor 269er zooming in, is a direct route between them, it would be the logical one for you to use. If there were no airway, you'd just draw a line between the two VORs and it would end up in the same spot. The radial for Victor 269er eastbound from Burley, let's move down here, happens to be 054 degrees. So to fly that radial, you'd set 054 in the OBS. And you confirm that you have the correct sensing since you know that 054 degrees is roughly east, and that's the direction you want to go. You'll also have a from indication in the window. Okay, now usually when you're halfway between VORs, you'll switch from the VOR behind you to the one in front of you to maintain good signal reception. So checking the chart, note that Victor 269er runs into the Pocatello VOR from the west on the 235 degree radial. But you'll dial the reciprocal of 235, 055 degrees in the OBS. Why? Well, the 235 degree radial defines the airway westbound from Pocatello. That's from the Pocatello VOR. And you're flying eastbound to the Pocatello VOR. That's why you dial 055. It agrees with the direction you're flying. Makes sense, doesn't it? By the way, you'll often see a slight change in your course from one VOR to the other. In this case, it went from 054 to now 055, the reciprocal of 235. That's because the difference in magnetic variation between those two VOR stations. I keep a big eraser in the airplane because flying always involves making corrections. Your heading and altitude vary, and you correct for those variations. In fact, your skill as a pilot is measured in part by how quickly you perceive the variations and how small you're able to keep the corrections. Oops, little spot. And so it is when you're flying a VOR course. You'll occasionally drift off course to one side or the other. How do you correct? Well, for example, if you're a little off course to the left while flying a VOR, the indicator will read 2 and you will have a right needle deflection. So, to center the needle, you'd follow the needle and alter your heading to the right to get back on course. And then once the needle is centered again, you remove some of that right correction by altering your heading a little bit back to the left. You don't want to fly right through your course. Again, when you use a VOR for navigation, the trick is to be sure that you set the OBS so that it agrees with your direction of flight. And that is the only way that the to from flag and the left-right needles will make sense. Well, do you ever feel kind of lost? Well, since you know that flying VOR radio solves the problem of staying on course, now let's look at how you can use your VORs to tell you exactly where you are. Other pilots always tell me exactly where to go, but sometimes I want to know where I am right now. A VOR radio is really a line of position. If you have two lines of position that cross, you have a position fix, a known point, because if you remember high school geometry, the intersection of two lines makes a point. And the point here, it only takes two ground stations to obtain a position fix. Tune in the first station, identify it, and center the needle. That establishes the radial your aircraft is on. Then tune in the second station, identify it, and center that needle, which establishes your radial from that station. And voila, X marks the spot. Right here, the point where the radials cross is the position of the aircraft at the time the fixes were taken. Simple, huh? You can even use VORs to mark your progress. If you're tracking along the Mission Bay 005 degree radial here, you may want to know when you've crossed the Julian 255 degree radial. Well, here's how you do it. Tune 114.0 on the number 2 VOR receiver. Identify the Julian VOR and set the 255 degree radial on the OBS right there. If you see a from flag and a right needle on the CDI, have you crossed the 255 degree radial or not? No, you have not. And this is why. If you know the station is to your right and you get a right needle when you tune a radial with a from indication, a right deflection, you can be sure that you have not crossed that radial. So remember, with a from indication, if the needle is on the same side of the airplane as the station, they're both to your right, you have not crossed the radial. Now, you probably recall that the abbreviation DME stands for Distance Measuring Equipment. If your airplane has DME, you can tell how far you are from Vortex and VOR DMEs, in this case 21.8 nautical miles. And some DMEs will actually tell you your ground speed as well. But for the ground speed reading to be accurate, You must be traveling almost directly to or from the station. Instead of DME, your new Skyhawk has a GPS to provide you with distance and other navigation information. We'll discuss GPS a little later on. Let's talk about another handy use for that VOR receiver, and that's as a runway finder. Okay, it's really not the VOR portion of the receiver that does the work, but it is the same instrument. Almost all VOR receivers will receive and display localizer information from the instrument landing system. Now, even though this is part of an instrument system, you don't need to be on an instrument flight plan to use it, and you don't even need an instrument rating. The localizer portion of an instrument landing system is a highly directional transmitter located at the end of a specific runway. The localizer transmits a signal that your airborne receiver translates into left-right information as it relates to the center line of the runway. What it does for you is help guide you to the threshold of that runway if you're having trouble picking it out visually. Now, when you're tuned to a localizer frequency, turning the OBS has absolutely no effect. No matter what setting you put in the OBS, the CDI will only provide left-right information relative to the center line of the runway. The needle acts just the same as if you were tracking to a VOR station, except that as you close in on the runway, the needle can really move a lot. It's 4 times as sensitive as when you're tuned to a VOR. You can discover if the runway you've selected has a localizer by checking the airport facility directory for your destination airport. The localizer frequency and the runway it serves will be listed right there. So now, when you're planning your next cross-country, you have VORs in your bag of tricks and know how to navigate to all those exotic destinations via the electronic highways in the sky. And if that picture doesn't make you want to get out and fly, I don't know what will.